Hello and welcome to Business on the Wire. I'm Mitali Mukherjee. A surge in cases is now easing off across many urban pockets in India, but the truth remains that figures are spreading and cases are spreading in rural India. Also true that deaths are likely much, much higher than what is being reported at this point. The only thing that could stand out or to help our country at this point could be a clearer vaccination strategy, but many question marks have emerged on that as well. Supply is running out, a pricing barrier has been put up, and access to those vaccines has become more complicated thanks to an app. What are the repercussions of this wave that India is facing, and what could the spillover effects be for countries across the world? Joining me to talk about that is a man who's dedicated most of his life studying vaccines and trying to work within the infectious diseases space. I'm joined now by Professor Peter Hotez. He's Dean for the National School of Tropical Medicine at Baylor College of Medicine in Houston. He is also co-director of the Texas Children's Center for Vaccine Development. Thank you very much for taking time out and speaking with me. I want to start with what you're making of and how you're reading the situation in India as you see it, sitting so far away, but obviously getting a sense of the magnanimity of the situation, the size of this tragedy.
Yeah, no, I mean it's as you point out, I only know what I see from my friends and colleagues, and here at Baylor College of Medicine and Texas Children's Hospital, we have so many faculty, professors, students, postdocs, residents who have family in India. So I get just the most horrific reports from them. And it's just so heartbreaking. So I feel, even though I'm not there, I feel I have some sense of going on from listening to their testimony and also what I see on social media, which I think is mostly accurate. And there's no question in my mind that this is a humanitarian catastrophe. I have one of my former students, medical students, who's a professor now at the University of Houston, Dr. Bhavna Lal, tells me she basically is up all night, because of the time difference, being on the phone with cousins and cousins of cousins who are desperate for oxygen or desperate for transportation to the hospital, or there's no hospital beds available and they've been sent home and have to manage basically intensive care in the home, which is of course impossible. And it's the scope of this tragedy is slowly building in my mind. I thought what happened in New York City was terrible. What's happened in Texas in this last summer was terrible. This dwarfs it. There's no question. And it just breaks my heart when I think of the staggering, not only death toll, but one of the things that we learned about COVID-19 is death. Yes, death's a huge part of it, but it's the beginning, because people have devastating long-term consequences, what we sometimes call long-haul COVID, and this will plague India for years to come, and not to mention the emotional trauma and the mental health aspects. So this will be one of the great watershed tragedies in the history of modern India, I believe.
There is also concern around the variants that India is battling with, Professor, the B1617 and B1618. As you said, there seem to be early studies about the fact that this is more virulent in nature, the transmissibility is higher, but is there enough data? Have you seen anything to suggest that it is causing a greater number of deaths as well? Because anecdotally, from what we get in terms of the number of cremations that are happening, or what the death certificates indicate, this is a much, much higher spike than anything India has dealt with before.
Yeah, I mean, in the beginning, what we were hearing is the 617 variant, the B1617, together with the B117 variant, which arose out of the UK, the latter one, were both there, and it wasn't clear in my mind whether which of the two was more responsible. It now looks like what some people call the 617.2. I know it's a dizzying array of numbers, seems to be the one that's outcompeting the others. But they're both bad actors, right? They both cause serious illness. Even the B117 variant, which started, which is now the dominant one in the United States, is deadly, and it affects young people as well. And of course, you have the other problem is, and that the health system of India is fragile to begin with. You've got densely populated areas, a size about a third of the United States. Even on a good day, it's not doesn't take much for hospitals and hospital systems to be overwhelmed. And now you're seeing this massive surge on hospital admissions. So in my mind, it's still a little difficult to sort out because you've got the perfect storm of so many variables. So first, you have the incredible urban density, in the big cities like Mumbai and Kolkata and Chennai, and the list goes on, right? These are where most of the world's mega cities are located. So you have incredible density. So there's a lot of virus transmission, high virus inoculum happening because people are so close on living on crowded conditions. Problem number one. Problem number two, you have both the B117, now the 617, 6172 variants, which seem to be more transmissible and may be causing higher viral load. Three, you have hospital systems getting overwhelmed so quickly. And we saw this where I am in Texas, especially in South Texas. That's when the mortality numbers go up, when hospital systems, it's not so much the beds even, it's the trained staff. We had this problem in New York. We had this problem in South Texas. You don't have enough physicians, nursing support, to manage an ICU bed. Any bed can be converted into intensive care unit bed. That's not the issue. It's the staff, the trained staff. That's what saves lives, is the trained nurses and the respiratory technicians and all of the people who know how to monitor the equipment and fix the broken equipment. This is what you need, and then that starts to break down. So all those things are happening at once, I think, to really cause this terrible devastation.
How do you think this is going to play out in the next couple of months, Professor? As you pointed out, there is going to be longer term damage of this. There is already talk of a wave three, which is ironic considering the fact that this wave two, if you want to call it that, has only just begun to move into rural parts of India where there is also tremendous loss of life and there are many, many people afflicted. From what you've seen over the last year or so of COVID, how do you think this will play out for India in the second half of the year?
Well, what I've seen happen, at least here in the United States, and I've seen it in Europe, there's always a bit of an autocorrection, if you want to use that phrase, in that people on their own figure out that they need to do social distancing, and then sometimes there's government mandated social distancing and masks, and then the numbers start to decline. And also people get infected and recovered, and they have some partial immunity for a period of time. And that often translates into a series of waves. And that's what we saw, for instance, here in the US in January. And so that's likely one scenario. But there's no question that to really get out of this, you're gonna have to, just like we have to, vaccinate our way through it. And that worries me as well, because look at the scope. What's the population of India? 1.1, 1.2 billion people. Our numbers that we calculated say you need 75, three-quarters of the population vaccinated. Think of that. That you're talking 800 million people immunized, 2 doses. That's 1.6 billion doses of vaccine. And where does that come from? I mean, it's great that the Biden administration stepped up and said they're going to donate 20 million doses of Pfizer Moderna vaccine and maybe 60 million of AstraZeneca vaccine. What is that? That's a section of a suburb of a major city in India, right? It's as we say, it's a drop in the bucket. So I think what's going to be absolutely critical is at the international level, we have to sit down with all of the leaders of the major Indian vaccine manufacturers, and whether it's Serum Institute of India, which is an extraordinary organization, or we work with Biological E, or Bharat Biotech, or and there's several others, and just simply ask the question, what do you need to be successful? And then just open it up, and whatever the vaccine producers in India need. And that's what we have to do, because ultimately India's, that is one of that's part of the greatness of India, its ability to make vaccines for the world. Now we just need to help India help itself and give them everything they need to be successful.
I do want to talk about vaccines at length, but just to finish up our discussion with regards to this virus itself, Professor, there is another fear that is now growing, which is that this is far more contagious and perhaps lethal for children. In fact, in many children who have got COVID, there has now been an increase in the percentage of MISC, or multi-system inflammatory syndrome. From everything that you've seen so far, does it look like these variants indeed are more lethal for children, or are children more susceptible to it?
So it's really interesting. I've just been asked the exact same question about Brazil and the P1 variant, and the answer is I just haven't seen the data. I mean, when you're getting so many people infected and there's so much transmission, it's hard for me to say that there's disproportionate effects on children as opposed to just so many people that are getting infected. And yes, kids are going to be swept up along with this, and we do see MISC. So I don't have the answer whether there's something unique about the variants that are emerging in India that are more specific for kids, or if it's just a matter of the volume. When you look at the numbers, I have to believe that a significant percentage of the country is getting infected. And I can't tell you exactly what, but it's when I talk to my colleagues here at the medical school where I'm a professor, and I have vast numbers of Indian friends and colleagues who are professors here. Every one of them has not just one or two family members. I mean, dozens of family members infected. Every one of them personally knows people who've lost their lives from COVID, and that's, to me, that's a sign that something huge is going on. Because when that happened, that's the same thing that happened in New York City. It's the same thing that happened in parts of Texas. When everybody starts to know many people who become infected, I know it's not very precise and it's a bit off the cuff, but I think there's some merit to it. That tells me that there's a huge percentage of the population being infected. And I would also say this is when that happens. Also, this is when a public health crisis takes on bigger dimensions. It ceases to just stay within the health sector, right? This becomes an economic crisis. This becomes a homeland security crisis. This is a homeland security crisis for India, and my heart just goes out to the Indian people and my colleagues and their families.
So let's talk about the vaccine situation as it stands, Professor. In March 21, I think you made some comments of lauding India's efforts, talking about how India, in collaboration with other universities, was working on vaccines that will rescue the world. But here we are in the month of May, where the Indian government has banned vaccine exports, where the government itself has fallen woefully short in terms of booking enough supply of vaccines, and the population stands at less than 10% that is fully vaccinated, and perhaps only about 2% I beg your pardon, 2% that is fully vaccinated, and 10% that's got one shot at this point. How do you make sense of it? And, is it disappointing to see the turn of events as they've moved from January onwards?
I think, when I made that statement, and I still stand by that statement because, I've always said this is part of the greatness of India, that Indian science and Indian industry has worked together to do something that no other country has done, which is take on the mission of making vaccines for the world. And this predates COVID-19. I mean, Serum Institute for years has been making vaccines for Africa, and same with my colleagues at Biological E and Bharat and others, and to my unyielding admiration that they've been doing this. And when COVID hit, I think the whole plan for the world, it was never said as much, it was never explicitly stated, but I think it was understood that the world would rely on India for producing COVID vaccines. And that was a blessing to the world. And that's what I said, it's a blessing to the world. Now, India is struggling, and I think we have to be careful not to be too critical at this point, because especially, what can I say coming from the United States? Look what we did. We and to my embarrassment, we hoarded, our government hoarded vaccines just like everybody else did. So the last thing I'm not in a position is to point a finger at India. So I'm worried. I'm more than disappointed or pointing fingers. I'm just worried for the world, because now there's a domino effect. The domino effect is, we depended on India to make vaccines for the world. Now India is struggling. The vaccine producers have to make vaccine for India. And now what happens for Africa? What happens for Latin America? So it was in retrospect, it was unfair to put that burden on India in the beginning, to say it all depends on you, India, to make vaccines for the world. That's not how it should ever work. The policymakers should have been in a position to build vaccine development capacity in Africa, build vaccine development capacity across Asia, build vaccine development capacity across South America. And the truth is, most of the world's LMICs, low and middle income countries, never really stepped up to do this in a big way. So that's the failing, really. And this has been something I've devoted my life to, is not only developing vaccines for neglected diseases, but build vaccine development capacity across the world. And we've been doing this in Latin America and the Middle East. And now we're starting to do that with Africa. But, we're a small organization at Baylor College of Medicine, our Texas Children's Center for Vaccine Development. So we can't do it alone. And this has to be in the long term, when we get through this, which we will get through. I think that's the other lesson. If you rely too much on one country, something like this could happen, and we should have anticipated it, and we need to build more capacity globally.
Even so, Professor, just for India, the elementary sort of barometer of a well-functioning vaccination program is that it is available to all those who should be vaccinated. What do you think the long-term repercussions might be for a country like India that is now falling very, very short in terms of our vaccination targets? If you look at this, the wave or the spike, our vaccination rate is much lower than our infection rate even now, despite us having perhaps crossed the worst part of our second wave.
Well, it was like in the beginning of our epidemic. The question was it a problem in the vaccination infrastructure, in the ability to get vaccines into the arms of people, or is there a problem in vaccine production capability? Or more likely, it's how it always is. It's never just one thing. It's probably both. I think one of the problems with that we found here in the United States for vaccinating is we never really had a good system in place for vaccinating adults. Our whole system was built on vaccinating children, and only gradually have we started to put some pieces in place of vaccinating adults. So when COVID hit, I don't think there was not much understanding of what needed to be done. There was a heavy reliance on the pharmacy chains, because a lot of our pharmacies here are franchised, they're chain stores, and hospital systems. And it turned out that only got us so far, especially in low-income neighborhoods, where many of those low-income neighborhoods are pharmacy deserts. You can't even find pharmacies. So that whole infrastructure had to be built in the middle of a pandemic, and I suspect something like that is going on in India as well. That the system is more oriented towards vaccinating kids, and vaccinating adults is a different proposition. So I think that's probably one thing that's in place. And second, I think in terms of scaling up and moving rapidly, again, there needs to be a better understanding of what the issues are. What don't the manufacturers have that they need? Is it supply? Is it trained personnel? Is it simply the scale of it and doing this rapidly? Again, I'm most likely some combination of all those things. So I think the key, right? One of the things that I've said in the U.S. and again, it's very hard to extrapolate from the U.S., which in comparison is a tiny country in terms of population compared to India, is right now pointing fingers is, a certain amount has to be done, is inevitable. But I'd say right now it's more about what do we do now to put that infrastructure in place and build things as we go along. And the other thing I've said in terms of our U.S. government is, I think our U.S. government is making a good faith effort to help India and help other countries. It's just that the scale is too modest. Great, you want to donate 20 to 80 million doses of vaccine, but it's nothing. Great, you want to do patent waivers, but a patent waiver is not going to generate 1.6 billion doses of vaccine. So I've asked the Biden administration to put forward a more comprehensive plan, which includes actually producing vaccine. I mean, when you look at the scale globally, look, we've got 1.1 billion people in sub-Saharan Africa, another billion people in India, another 500 million people in the other smaller low-income countries of Asia, 650 million people in Latin America. We're talking, 7-8 billion doses of vaccine. And I don't think anybody anticipated the scale of that. And as good as the Pfizer and BioNTech and Moderna vaccines are, that's what I got, the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. It's a new technology, and you just can't, with any new technology, it becomes an engineering problem. You can't scale it up that rapidly, and that's why you need more low-cost, unfussy, durable vaccines for a situation like that. And that's what we've been doing, and we've been making coronavirus vaccines for the last decade, and then we made a prototype COVID-19 vaccine. As soon as we had the sequence, we transferred that technology to Biological E in Hyderabad, and now they're scaling up production as fast as they can. It's going into phase 3 trials, and I have to say, I really like working with Biological E. They're really good scientists, and they're smart, and I learn a lot from them, and they're really committed to this. And I've also been pretty impressed with the Indian Regulatory Authority as well. They're moving as expeditiously as possible without compromising safety. So I think, everything that I've seen firsthand says to me that they're doing all they can and as efficiently as possible without compromising safety. And that's why I say the focus now is to say these big vaccine producers in India, they're doing all they can. We have to ask them what is it that they need.
What do you think the global solution might look like, Professor? As you pointed out, one is opening up patents, and the other is sharing when one is hoarding. There are several governments that have held on to far more in terms of doses that they require. But I just want to also sort of layer this question of mine with the point that none of this is new. Even when trials were being conducted, it was clear that the trials were not being conducted in developed countries, but in developing nations. And the outcome, as we see it, is the fact that the vaccines are now moving in haste and are far more accessible again to the developed world. Do you frankly see a solution coming out, on a global platform? Do you think there will be that call of humanity is larger than nationality?
Well, I've devoted my life to something called neglected diseases. So by definition, I'm the most optimistic person you'll ever meet. So with that caveat, I will say yes. And by the way, I would add that it's not that the world doesn't learn from past pandemics. With each pandemic over the last 20 years, we have put in some level of infrastructure. So for instance, after SARS, remember SARS coming out of southern China in 2002, that's when we created international health regulations, IHR 2005. After the H1N1 pandemic, the pandemic flu in 2009, we put in place a global health security agenda. After Ebola in 2014 in Africa, we put together CEPI, the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness and Innovation. And I think all of those things are helping in this current pandemic. I think after this one, I think there's a few things that we need to recognize. And one is, as wonderful as India is in terms of vaccine production, just relying on India alone is unfair and not adequate. We need to figure out a way to reproduce what India has done and do it in multiple countries across the world. No vaccines, for instance, are produced on the African continent. South America, Central America, profoundly underachieve. There's some in Brazil and Cuba, but nothing like what India does. And so that has to be reproduced there. There needs to be something like the Indian producers in the Middle East. We don't have anything like that. So I think that's one of the pieces that needs to put in place. And I think we need to realize that that's an investment, and it's not just building bricks and mortar, not just building the factory. That's the least of it. It's the training of the human capital. We don't have enough, just like the ICUs right now in India are being overwhelmed because there's not enough trained nursing staff and doctors to manage the load. It's the same for vaccine production. It's vaccine production is not like small molecule drugs. There's an art to it. There's a 20-year learning curve, and you have to build that in place. And India's done it. We have to do it for the rest of the world. And this is part of the problem: is when you look at the amount of investment in the time horizons for vaccine infrastructure, it's usually on the order of decades. And leaders of countries don't like things that are on the order of decades. They want to show what they've done, in the 4 years they're in office, and it doesn't work like that for vaccines. So it does take visionary leadership to build in vaccine infrastructure, but we have to figure out a way to do it, and that's really critical. I think the other piece to this is, in the U.S., the reason why 600,000 Americans lost their lives from COVID-19 is partly due to the SARS coronavirus. I say partly because in equal measure, it was due to defiance of masks, defiance of social distancing, even defiance of vaccines from political extremism on the right. And now we've got now a globalized anti-vaccine, anti-science movement that's very aggressive, and I see it infiltrating into India as well, and some of it is coming from Russia as well. So the Russian government is, this has been reported by U.S. and British intelligence, is piling on a whole system of what's called weaponized health communication, and they've been doing this well before COVID-19. They've been doing it to destabilize democracies. They're using anti-vaccine science as a wedge issue, and now Novetta, the analytics group, has reported that they're even doing this to discredit other COVID-19 vaccines in favor of Sputnik V, their vaccine. So that has to stop, and there has to be, and I've written an essay in Nature, which is one of the very important science journals a couple of weeks ago, that says, we have to look on this anti-vaccine, anti-science movement as now a globalized empire that's got many moving parts, and we've got to create a United Nations agency task force to really look at how we confront it. And we have to treat anti-science as seriously as we, build an infrastructure to prevent nuclear proliferation, or, you name it, global terrorism or cyber attacks. It's gotten that serious. And that's what's really interesting, is this has caused an uproar in the anti-vaccine, anti-science community. So I'm getting this wave of white nationalists attacks now against me on social media, on email. They say an army of patriots is going to come and hunt me down, and to which I say, look, it's just me, my wife Anne, my special needs daughter, and the cat. You don't need a whole army of patriots. One patriot will be more than enough, or two patriots. So I laugh, but it's really very, very scary, and a very scary time for me and my family right now.
No, I can empathize completely with the fear and anxiety you must face, and I have seen some of that hate on your social media platforms. What do you think the best way might be to take on this vaccine hesitancy, though, Professor? I was speaking to a doctor within India who's also making the point that we need to keep fine tuning for cultural context. For example, there are completely unfounded WhatsApp messages going around saying that the vaccine causes fertility issues. So there are several pockets in India, in rural India, where people do not want to take this because they're just so scared of what the side effects might be.
So let's take that fertility issue, and the claim is that the COVID-19 vaccine causes infertility. Well, one, it's not true, and second, it doesn't even have any biological plausibility. But remember where this came from. As I started debunking, at first the anti-vaccine groups, starting more than a decade ago, claimed vaccines cause autism. And I have a daughter with autism, and I wrote a book called Vaccines Do Not Cause Rachel's Autism, which made me public enemy number one. They began calling me the OG villain, which I had to look up. It means the original gangster villain. So you're interviewing the original gangster villain today. and and I think I was partly effective, in terms of taking some steam out of the anti-vaccine movements, and they started looking around for other things. So what did they do? They started glomming on the HPV vaccine, the human papillomavirus vaccine for teenage girls for cervical cancer and other cancers. Now it's given to both girls and boys. Guess what their first assertion was? It causes infertility. So what they've done now is they've copy pasted the fake assertion about the HPV vaccine and stuck it onto the COVID-19 vaccine. So the fact that people are getting WhatsApp texts saying COVID-19 vaccine causes infertility, my premise is that that's not some homegrown grassroots thing that's arising. This is deliberate disinformation that's coming out of the US anti-vaccine movement that is now globalized.
Will it be enough, though, to attempt to pour cold scientific facts over this? It's very organic. People feel this very strongly. Like I said, even in rural India, people are talking to each other and saying, I know someone who got the shot and they got a fever. They're probably going to die of it, so don't get the shot. How do you tackle vaccine hesitancy? Can it just be tackled with scientific facts at this point?
Well, I think you have to put as much pro-vaccine, accurate scientific information out there as you possibly can, and that's what we're doing in the United States, public service announcements and that sort of thing. But you also have to recognize that it's not that these people are ignorant. It's not that these people are not thoughtful. They are, but they're inundated with garbage. And when you're inundated with garbage, it starts to have an effect, right? So that's why I think we have to really look at how what are our options for kind of dismantling this terrible anti-vaccine, anti-science empire, because that's what it is. These are people monetizing the internet off the fake news. They're selling fake nutritional supplements. There's, Amazon.com. If you go to Amazon.com and look up books on vaccinations, it's almost all fake anti-vaccine books and COVID conspiracy books. So people are monetizing this situation, and we have to figure out a way to cut off the money. And we have to do something about Russia. We have to have a frank discussion with the leadership of the Russian government, maybe at the UN Security Council, that they've got to stop this practice. There's no other way around it. And by the way, for a scientist like myself to talk about this stuff is not easy, right? I mean, I got my medical degree and my PhD in biochemistry to make vaccines to help people, not to lead a charge against anti-vaccine, anti-science movement. And I have to talk about very uncomfortable things. I mean, who am I to talk about Vladimir Putin, right, or the Russian government, or this disinformation? Who am I to talk about how people are monetizing the? I mean, this is not my comfort zone or even my expertise, but I do it because I feel it's necessary to save lives.
Tell me a little bit about the vaccine that you're working on, whether stage 3 trials have begun, what kind of feedback you're getting, and how soon you think you'd be able to supply this in generous measures across India or perhaps across the world.
Yes, so our group, which is called I'm a professor at Baylor College of Medicine, where I head our tropical medicine school, and also co-director of our Texas Children's Center for Vaccine Development. We've been making vaccines for 20 years for neglected diseases. And then we adopted a coronavirus program about 10 years ago, working with the New York Blood Center. They had a very interesting concept for producing the receptor binding domain of the protein in yeast. And we made a prototype SARS vaccine, for instance, in more than a decade ago. And then when the COVID-19 sequence came in, we used all of their same approaches and moved very quickly. And then licensed non-exclusively the technology to Biological E, and they're scaling up production. Our goal is not to make money. We didn't file any patents on it because we don't want intellectual property to be a barrier. Our goal is not to make money. Our goal is to do this for humanitarian reasons. They're now we've really loved working with them. As I say, biologically is just some of the best vaccine scientists we've ever worked with, and they are now scaling up production because they know how to do this. It's the same technology used to make the hepatitis B vaccine, the recombinant hepatitis B vaccine, which is done through yeast fermentation. And people have been giving recombinant hepatitis B vaccine for 40 years. So there's already a deep knowledge base on how to do this. It's not like they have to learn a brand new technology. So they were able to hit the ground running and scaling it up. And now we've done phase 1, phase 2 trial. They've done phase 1, phase 2 trials. It's really very much a bio-E vaccine, although we're certainly helping and in discussions with them every week. And now the Indian Regulatory Authority has given them the green light to move into phase 3. So the hope is that if all the stars align, this could be released through emergency use by the summer. And that's the aspirational goal. And then come up with a global strategy working with CEPI, the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovation, to launch a global strategy as well.
One final question to you, Professor. Here in India, children have not been to school for a year and a half, and it looks like this year will also go down the same way.
Oh, it's terrible.
Yes. A week back, the government had to shut down vaccinations for those over 18, the 18 to 45, because we just simply don't have enough. And when we look at your part of the world, it looks like there is at least light at the end of the tunnel. How long do you think it's going to be before countries can get to some semblance of being on par in terms of returning to normalcy or having some kind of a pre-COVID life? Because things, as you said, and as you know from your colleagues and friends, look quite dire at this point.
Yeah, I think in the U.S. it's happening now. We're already seeing, things are coming back to life very much, and the economy's picking up. My friend was at the Houston airport, and he said it was just packed. It was so people are seeing friends and family again. They're traveling, so I can't say it's pre-pandemic. I think I said on a newscast, I said the world's going to look like it did in 2019 very soon. And then I quickly got admonished for that. They said, no, 2019 was not a good year. You should have picked a different year. I said, okay, you pick whatever pre-pandemic year you like. And I think the same will be from India, but the only way to do this is to vaccinate your way out of it. The social distancing and the masks, these are all important measures, and they're saving lives, but they're an interim until we can vaccinate. And so that's got to be the priority, is vaccinate as many people as you can as quickly and safely as possible. And I'm up in the middle of the night thinking about India and on Zoom calls with Biological E and others, doing everything I can. And that's just got to be the priority. We've got to scale up vaccine production. And we, as I keep saying enough, the one take home is we've got to do everything we can to ensure the success of the Indian vaccine producers and to ensure the success of the vaccinators, the people who are actually delivering the vaccines, putting that infrastructure in place. Because if you don't do that, then nothing happens. Nothing good will happen. And that's got to be the priority.
We live in hope, Professor. At this point, hope is all we have. But thank you very, very much. I know how busy you're running, and I really appreciate this conversation with you and all the insight that you had to share. Thank you.
Thank you. I love India. I love the Indian people, and I hope you're successful.
Thank you indeed.
To receive instant updates on all videos from The Wire, click the subscribe button and hit the bell icon. Pay to support independent journalism. Click the link in the description and choose the amount you want to pay.